In this lesson, we'll explore how to use the powerful new V-Ray Toon material, which is capable of creating different cartoon, cel-shaded, and hand-drawn looking effects, while at the same time offering you all the control and deep customizability of the standard V-Ray material. Let's take a look at how we can use the Toon shader with this architectural exterior scene containing an office building and surrounding environment. Before we begin, note that the scene is already lit by a V-Ray sunlight, with its size multiplier set very low to create sharper shadows. To start, let's open up the V-Ray settings, go to the V-Ray tab, and enable the override material option, so we can have a cleaner preview of our geometry. Now let's start a production render. Also, since I'm looking to create a flat surface appearance in order to better represent the Toon shader, I have turned off global illumination, because I don't want the bounced light to affect the colors of the shader. That said, you can feel free to use global illumination if you'd like to create a different effect. Okay, next, let's select the building's facade panel's geometry, then open up the material editor and select the facade panel's V-Ray Toon material. I have already set up the scene so that the facade is excluded from the override material. This way, we can work on the facade's shader while everything else will continue to be overridden and render gray. Let's apply this default V-Ray Toon material now on the facade panel's geometry. Next, let's start the IPR so we can get a preview as we modify the shader. Note that I've also prepared a color palette in a gradient ramp map, which I'll use to pick colors for our material. Okay, to begin tweaking our shader, let's click the diffuse color swatch and switch it to a lighter gray color. Next, to make the facade pop out more, we can tweak the diffuse ramp parameter below and create points by holding Alt and left-clicking on the ramp. Let's add a control key to the diffuse ramp parameter here. Then, I'm going to click the eyedrop and select the blue color from the color palette I set up below to change the color of this key to blue. Now, let's add another key to the right and set this one's color to light blue, following the same steps. The next thing I want to do here is make the shadows more interesting. I've prepared a gradient ramp map that is tiled to appear like hatching for the shadows, which will enable us to create sketches or hand-drawn styles and give the shadows more detail. And if we select the leftmost 0 key, we can then connect the hatch ramp map to it as an instance. Now you'll see in our preview that we're starting to get a lot more interesting details from the Toon shader to work with. Let's also change the interpolation mode for each key to smooth to make the gradient transition smoother between them. Next, let's click and drag to position the keys to adjust the transition of the gradient look until we find something that we like. In this case, I'll separate them out a bit. Now, I'd also like to create a specular ramp for the reflections to create a nice gradient appearance. First, I'm going to set the reflection color to a light gray. Then, let's set the glossiness parameter to a mid-gray value like 0.5 so that the reflections will be slightly present. Below on the specular ramp, let's also add a key and change its color to yellow using the color palette once again. Then, let's set its interpolation mode to smooth and move it to the left so that it highlights the upper left part of the facade. I'll also change the interpolation of the leftmost specular key to smooth as well. Okay, now I think that's starting to look pretty nice. Lastly, let's change the light control parameters for our Toon shader. We'll first need to check on Replace Light Color so that the color for all lights illuminating the facade is replaced by the light color swatch below. I'll then click the color swatch and set the light color to a saturated yellow using my color palette. Now, let's increase the blend intensity to the maximum value 1 so that the original light and the diffuse color here are fully blended together based on the blend mode above. This way, the Toon shader will react to the chosen light color and blending mode, overriding the sun's light color, which in this scene is white. To better illustrate its effect on the scene, I'll switch to a couple different blending modes here so you can compare the results. Okay, I think the lighten blending mode looks pretty good, so let's leave it at that. Now that we're all set with the Toon shader material for the facade panels, let's head back to the V-Ray settings and turn off the override material option in the render setup window. Now, we can render the scene with all the other Toon materials that I set up in advance for the other objects. Following this same workflow, you can feel free to experiment with the Toon shading on the other objects to create your own stylized 2D look to your satisfaction. Altogether, the new Toon shader in V-Ray Next is loaded with powerful stylistic options for cartoonish or cel-shaded designs, empowering you with the flexibility to express your artistic endeavors.